I think of the year and in this year, and I'd love to start it out with a prayer just to kind of orient ourselves. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. I want to especially thank the St. Timothy's community here. Father Meng has been a wonderful supporter. He's filled in wonderfully, as difficult as it was to fill in the shoes of Father Weems, who we do have in our midst, is here today. Father Weems is also on our board at Divine Mercy Care, so we're blessed to have his wisdom and his involvement. Also welcome Monique Baruti, who's also a board member. I saw her earlier. Dr. John Bachowski is also a board member at Divine Mercy Care. We're very blessed by having you all here. This is a really unique and interesting topic. When we started to pull the individuals together on our panel, which I'll discuss and introduce to you in a moment, we knew that this was going to be a unique subject, and we're really excited also to be live streaming this, and we'll be able to share this, and you'll be able to share it with your friends, because I think it's one of those topics that it goes to the core, it goes to the heart for a lot of families who do struggle with infertility, and they're wanting an answer, and we're trying to help bring the answer that is really best for them. It's best for the babies, of course, the embryos, and it's best for it's really best for their own well-being as they move forward. I also want to quickly, before we get too much into the topic, to thank our sponsors. We're really fortunate at Divine Mercy Care to have Enable Design, who designs websites, has been a really wonderful partner with us and is rebuilding our website as we speak, and you'll see that in the next few months. Blue Mantle Consulting is one of our board members, Pete Goyette, who's wonderful to support us, McCarthy Acres and Tepeyac Title, Andrew Forsaro and Integrity Home Mortgage, McCarthy Acres Law Practice, and the Culture of Life Foundation. So we're wonderful to have those partners help us sponsor and make this lecture series and others that we've had and really to move in the right direction and to offer those to our community. And really this part of our mission. You'll see serve, inspire, and unify. These are the pillars of our mission, and we do it every day. We serve with Tepeyac OBGYN, and we do a variety of things there, the infant gift baskets, the infant loss support, and last month we did our infant loss memorial service. But the inspire aspect, and this is kind of where we're at right now, is this idea of educating the community, educating providers on the different pro-life issues that are out there, and educating the local community as well. But the unify portion of things is done on a couple of different levels, both locally, and we're really excited. We're moving forward with a local group of medical providers, and not just medical providers, but really providers of services that will help women almost at every turn that she's facing. If she's looking at an unplanned pregnancy, or if she's looking at a planned pregnancy that she just doesn't have housing for, or she doesn't have food, or she's a woman in need who really needs accompaniment and support, or counseling services. So this is a wonderful, exciting program that we're really in the midst of pulling together. But it's all the services that women need, and that's all locally in the Northern Virginia area, and we're really excited to roll that out in the next couple of weeks and months. Certainly a directory for all pregnancy centers to use and for women's shelters to use, and it's really an answer to when we hear people say, well, you pro-lifers, you only care about the baby. You don't care about the mother. So this is really a good answer to that. And the other is our pro-women's healthcare centers, our PWHC, which is a consortium of centers that are around the country and are rallied around a standard of care. And these standards are really, they're Catholic in their orientation, they're and Christian for sure, and they set a good high bar for real care for women and a real holistic mind, body, and spirit. And it's an exciting venture. We've got 12 certified centers. There's 2 more in the short course to be certified, and another 50 or so that are at some phase of the certification process. So it's an exciting time for pro-women's healthcare centers. I'd really, again, thanking St. Tim's to allow us to bring in this group of panelists here, and I think you're going to enjoy their wisdom and their expertise. First, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Lahl. Jennifer is the founder and president of the Center for Bioethics and Cultural Network. Jennifer couples her 25 years of experience as a pediatric critical care nurse and a hospital administrator and a senior level nursing manager with a deep passion for speaking for those who have no voice. She serves as the North American Editorial Board of Ethics and Medicine and now produces documentary films on issues of third-party reproduction and the fertility industry. Next to her is Jennifer Watson. Jennifer Kimball Watson is an executive director of Culture of Life Foundation and is an adjunct professor of bioethics at the Ave Maria School of Law. She is an expert in artificial reproductive technologies and now serves on the board of Divine Mercy Care. Also, Dr. John Bachowski, the founder of Divine Mercy Care and Tepeyac OBGYN. He is a practicing board-certified physician, originally a pioneer in the IVF industry in the late 80s, and in his personal journey has taken into a different path in approaching infertility. And then also, we're really blessed as a last-minute. We picked him up on waivers, but he's fantastic going along his journey, and he's a wonderful resource. And it's this Dr. John Gordon is at the end, and Dr. John is formally, as recent as maybe the last few months and weeks, hours, was an infertility physician and a leader in this region. And has had a really an amazing journey that's kind of taken him to kind of seeing the light and the wisdom that the rest of the panelists will actually share with you tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. Jennifer Lahl will start out first. Each of the panelists will start out with their introduction, and then we'll move on to questions.
And hopefully this will work. So I've had the privilege of spending the day with Cheney Mullins today. And if you don't know Cheney, she's lovely. And I tell you, she makes me want to move here so I can be a patient. But that's not part of my my husband's plan. Can you help me just get it to full screen? Sorry. I don't want to screw it up. Nothing says we care and support you more than your financial donations in support of the wonderful work that Cheney and Dr. John do. So if you're able to support them with your finances, it's my little fundraising pitch. And there's nothing like a monthly supporter too, because the work goes on every day, no matter what. So be generous, give often, and give big. We like commas and zeros. So I have 20 minutes to tell you everything I know about third-party reproduction. And I'm going to answer my question right now. The conference is called, Is Third-Party Reproduction Pro-Women? The answer is no. So we can all go home now. Why isn't it advancing? There, okay. So I became a documentary filmmaker because sometimes when you talk about science and ethics and medicine and technology, people's eyes glaze over. And I believe that storytelling is very powerful. So we opted in the space of third-party reproduction to tell stories through documentary film. And some of my films are here tonight on the back table. But we made Exploitation, which was a shoestring budget film that we made in one weekend. With very, very little funding, and within 4 weeks we won the Best Documentary Film prize at the California Independent Film Festival, and we sort of kept reading that email going, did we win? Was there a typo? Did somebody? And that sort of put us on the map. And then when exploitation came out, what happened was we started hearing from people called the donor conceived. The donor conceived people here through anonymous sperm and egg donation, and they said, please make a film about us and tell our stories. So we made Anonymous Father's Day, and in order to finish the trilogy, we had to make breeders a subclass of women. And that is our documentary film that features American women who made the decision to be surrogates and all the different ways that surrogacy happens, which I'll talk about more in a bit. And then our newest film, which just came out, is called Big Fertility, and that's one American surrogacy story, but it brings in the global dimension of third-party conception, because egg and sperm and embryos are really tiny, can be bought and sold and frozen and shipped all around the world. And as different countries have different laws around this, the market, if you will, shifts. And it shifts heavily to the US because there's not any dollar in America that we don't like to make. So a little sort of primer, AI, and I'm from the Silicon Valley, does not mean artificial intelligence. In this slide, it means artificial insemination. When I was a staff nurse at the University of California, San Francisco, the nurses often had their little sperm turkey baster parties where the male nurses would donate and give their sperm, and they would go home with their syringes and do home insemination. So think of just sort of low tech, right? You know, no petri dishes, no medical doctors needed. If you Google sperm donation in Starbucks, you'll see that people are hooking up on Craigslist ads and going into Starbucks bathrooms and passing specimens. It's really pretty gritty. It's been around for a long, long time, and a lot of what we know in assisted reproduction we learned from veterinarian. You know, this was being done on the farms with cows and sheep and pig and blah, blah, blah. But fast forward to 1978, the famous, you know, the world awoke to the news that the first test tube baby has been born through IVF. It's easy, let your imagination be your guide. It's easy to get sperm out of a man's body. It's much more difficult to get eggs out of a woman's body. Alan Trounsden, a fertility doctor who was then down in Australia, has in the medical literature the documentation of the first embryo created through IVF using a donor egg. So when you think of Louise Brown, it was Mrs. Brown's egg. It was Mr. Brown's sperm, so it was genetically their biological child. But fast forward to 5 years later, now that we know how to get eggs out of women's bodies, we can use donor eggs to help women who, for various reasons, are not able to use their own eggs. Trounsden is significant to my state, California, because he was brought over to run our California Institute of Regenerative Medicine, which is our embryo stem cell human cloning bond initiative. Because who is best on embryonic stem cell research and human cloning? But fertility doctors. I mean, they've been making embryos for a long, long time to make babies. So he shifted and came to California to run our California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. My understanding he's back in Australia now, though. And in being in a largely Catholic or pro-life audience, you know, the saying that we have is the birth control pill allowed us to have sex without making babies, and now we have technology that allows us to make babies without sex. Elton John, his partner, David Furnish, came to my state twice. They bought eggs from one woman, they rented wombs from another. They now have children, no sexual act whatsoever. Lisa Mundy, who's a journalist, wrote a book called Everything Conceivable, and I say everything is conceivable as long as you have a checkbook. Because this is very, very expensive. So this is my Ain't It All Bad and Don't We All Know It slide. Situated since 1978 when we were able to do the first IVF test tube baby. You know, we have a global, unregulated, multi-billion-dollar a year industry. Postmenopausal pregnancies, you know, 40 is the new 50 or 50 is the new 60, whatever. We have literally women who could be or are grandmothers giving birth to children through assisted reproduction. There was a woman in Nebraska who recently just gave birth to her son's baby and his gay partner using the gay partner's sister's eggs. And people were all over social media going, she should win Mother and Grandmother of the Year award. And I said, she should not have done this. Litter births, you know, again, back to my state, California, Octomom. You know, are our bodies designed to carry 8 babies? Is that a high-risk pregnancy? Is that proper medicine? We have to make up names, you know, twiblings, triplings, when women hire multiple surrogates and split their embryos because they don't want to burden a surrogate with a high-risk twin pregnancy, so they will hire two surrogates who basically give birth to their children. All the testing that we now do on embryos, because the product at the end is a baby. And if you're going to spend all this money, you don't just want a baby, you want a particular kind of baby. Save your siblings. We saw this a lot when I was a pediatric nurse. You have a sick child who needs a genetic match. If you saw Judy Picolt's book, My Sister's Keeper, or read her, saw the movie or read her book, it really did, I thought, a good job of unpacking the ethics of when you create multiple embryos to test the one that's the genetic match for the sick child and bring that child to birth, so that you can take the really stem cell rich cord blood and give a transplant to the sick child, and so that one child is created for a purpose to save a sick sibling. And then the whole demographic shift: single mothers by choice, single dads. Mr. Wright hasn't come along. My biological clock is ticking. I have all this technology available. And then the ethics around gametes or egg and sperm. So if you hear me say gametes, that's egg and sperm. Intrafamilial or anonymous. The American Society of Reproductive Technology has a document that basically talks about, is it okay for a sister to give a sister her eggs? Is that okay? Is it okay for a sister to carry a pregnancy for her sister? Is it okay for an infertile son to get sperm from his dad to help his wife conceive? And just sort of when does that yuck factor kind of kick in? When you kind of go, maybe sisters helping sisters or brother helping brothers is okay. I'm not so sure about dads helping their daughters or their daughter-in-laws or mothers. So the whole ethics around that, and as I mentioned, grandmother surrogacy in the Nebraska case. CRISPR, gene editing, that's been all over the news, where we create an embryo and we go in and we edit out a bad gene, and what are the ethics around that, or what are the unknowns, what are the safety? Artificial wombs, artificial egg, artificial sperm. Pretty soon will we just be obsolete? Now that we know that we can make life in the laboratory and we don't need sexual intercourse anymore, will we not even need human beings at one point because we have all this artificial? And then the data that I track every year with the CDC, overwhelmingly IVF cycles continue to fail. The majority of IVF cycles fail. And again, it's very, very expensive. So in exploitation, you'll meet young women in the United States who made the decision to sell their eggs. They saw an ad, help somebody, make dreams come true, make a lot of money that you need. And all of the women in the film had immediate short-term risks, whether they had stroke, whether they had torsioned ovaries, whether they had infections. And then several of them went on to develop longer-term problems with their own fertility, problems with their own ability to conceive, long-term effects of stroke that still affect these women today because, once you recover from a stroke, sometimes there's this residual effect. So I'm going to show a clip real quick of exploitation. Oops, sorry. Is it working? There it is. There will be sound.
And we see young women being looked at as a market for eggs.
If you're tall, attractive, physically fit, and have a desire to help, and what person doesn't want to see themselves that way?
You have to be attractive woman of all ethnicity between the age of 21 and 29. So that's also pretty screwed up, I think.
On top of that, they looked for someone with a very good education. They did an IQ test on me.
And they made it seem like it was, destiny that this couple found me, and it was this whole big thing.
And so I did the math, and I figured out that I needed about $3,000. And if I had that $3,000, everything would be fine.
I just very much had the altruistic piece of me triggered.
Everything that happened to me was a chain of events where certain medical risks were not taken into account.
And when he saw my distended abdomen, his face went white.
She looked as if she were 6 months pregnant. I couldn't believe it.
My stomach bloated up so bad that I couldn't even breathe. At that point, I had to go to the hospital.
The whole time I felt like they were trying to get rid of me.
And he looked me in the eye and he said, "Oh, Alexandra, we will try to save your ovary, but you may lose your ovary."
I did make poor decisions as a result of the financial compensation.
And I made a decision to sell my eggs. That affected my ability to reproduce.
I mean, I can't have my own children now.
My story isn't documented in any statistics anywhere.
They become forgotten. They're a faceless person that comes in and donates their eggs, and then they're gone.
So in that film, you'll see different women and hear their different stories, but all of them saw an ad. They saw an ad that said they were being an angel, that they were helping build a family for an otherwise infertile couple that would not be able to have children. They're actually not given proper informed consent because we've never done any long-term studies on healthy women, not patients, healthy women who take high-dose powerful hormones in order to be egg providers. Two of my colleagues and I, we published last year, I think it was, in the Reproductive Biomedical Journal, just a case study of 5 women who were egg donors, otherwise healthy, no history of breast cancer. Egg donors are screened out. You know, we don't want to buy eggs from women who have histories of horrible diseases. And these all, as very young women, went on to develop breast cancer. We had the most difficult time through the editorial process getting that journal to not totally gut our article and publish it. And of course, they finally did publish it, but they had to devote their editorial page to why our article was, you know, basic junk, when it was just a case report. You know, isn't it interesting that these 5 otherwise healthy women, so they aren't properly informed. And the issue of money and how money corrupts informed consent. How many of you have ever gone to your doctor and had to sign informed consent while looking at a check for $10,000 or $15,000? And we know that people will take risk when they need money, and they will really take much more risk if they really need more money. And I like to remind young college students, you're not helping somebody have a baby. You're helping somebody to have your baby, your genes, your family history, maybe look like you, maybe have interests like you, and whatever. So then we made a short, Maggie's story.
It's important to me to be able to help people. They're always looking for really intelligent women with a good background that would be interested in helping other people. And at the time I was 19 or 20, and I just thought, wow, that's a way that I could help people, and I'm not using my eggs. You kind of develop this train of thought where you really want to be chosen. It would be something special to be one of the chosen ones that could help people. I definitely was not forced. I didn't feel like I was coerced, but I do think that I was a little naive, and it didn't occur to me that I could say no, because in my mind I would have been saying, no, I don't want to help people anymore.
So Maggie is in the Seattle, Washington area, and she's a 10-time egg seller who then went on and developed breast cancer. They actually found the lump in her breast in her last donation cycle. And in her story, you'll hear the agency would call her back, because the story is, well, the couple's ready to have another child, and they'd like to use the same egg donor. So at least the siblings will sort of be genetically related. And again, that playing on the altruism of the young woman who feels like, oh, well, I helped them have a baby, and now they're ready for a sibling, and oh, I really should. And of course, the money plays a factor into it. When 2 of my oldest daughters went to UC Berkeley, and I used to always make them bring me home the Daily Cow with all the egg donor ads. I remember my one daughter complained one time because it's the Daily Cow, which means by the time I found out, it was like the next day. And she's like, Mom, I had to go into like the Jewish frat house and climb over a bunch of guys smoking hookah pipes so I could get yesterday's Daily Cow. I'm like, it's for the cause. But, you know, they have these very, very glitzy ads. You know, they're always eugenic. You know, we're looking for a particular nuclear type, a genius egg donor. We lobbied really hard in California to get warning labels put on ads when Schwarzenegger was the governor. It was a very gutted bill that eventually Schwarzenegger signed because Resolve, the lobbying arm of American Society of Reproductive Medicine, came in. And so the actual bill that was signed into law says, if you follow the ASRM guidelines, then you are exempt from having to put warning labels on your ads. Well, of course, everybody says they follow guidelines because guidelines are meaningless. And then, of course, like I said, we had to make the surrogacy film. And so in Breeders, you'll meet these 4 American surrogates, and then Jessica on the end was born of surrogacy, so she travels and speaks out against feeling like she was a commodity and a product. And we told the story in a particular way because it's how the policy debate. So we have altruistic surrogates who weren't being paid. We have commercial surrogates who were being paid. We have traditional surrogates, but I don't like that word, but so it's her biological egg and her womb that she's giving away or selling, and then the gestational surrogate who's just providing the womb. And in every one of these cases, things went terribly wrong, short-term and longer-term, whether they be medical pregnancy complications, or they be breakdown in family relationships. So all these women were thinking that they were helping, doing a wonderful, good thing, and you'll have to just learn more about that. I'm going to pass over that trailer in the interest of time because Cheney's keeping me to task here. So again, the marketing and the advertisement, you're an angel, you're this wonderful person. We can fix all this by regulation. If we have just good contracts and everybody is fine. It's easy for surrogates to separate from the children. The children, it doesn't matter to them. You're just the easy bake oven. There's none of this maternal child bonding that we practice like crazy in pediatric nursing. We really encourage maternal child bonding, but in this case, we just sort of say it doesn't matter. And we know that there have been, women. I have a new book out that's back there. It's called Broken Bonds, and it's just a compilation of a whole bunch of surrogate stories and what they thought it was going to be like, and then when they got into it, how things turned terribly, terribly wrong. The womb isn't arbitrary. I knit you together in your mother's womb. It's not some, nice woman who's helping you or some poor woman in India who's helping you. And it really does matter to the well-being of women and mothers and children. And again, they have all the glitzy advertisement. I like this one, take home your baby with no visa hassles. Gets back to the international problem of it. So a lot of agencies will market themselves as, we'll help you navigate all the international laws. If you Google surrogacy and anchor baby, the Chinese come by in large numbers to California, because once a baby is born in the United States, that's a U.S. citizen, and all of surrogacy is illegal in China. It's illegal overwhelmingly in most of Europe. The global south in the last 2 years has closed their borders, taken the money out of it. Thailand, Singapore, India, Nepal, shut it down. Why? Women have been harmed, babies have been harmed, women have died. It's been a train wreck. And our new film, Big Fertility.
Who am I now? I'm a broken woman who has been used, lied to, and exploited. I very much regret my decision to serve as a surrogate. When you find out how much you can make from being a surrogate and how it's delivered to you as like this glamorous thing, you're going to be catered to and you get to eat what you want and, become pregnant, and it's an amazing feeling, and it pays really well.
I believe that surrogacy does actually target people that are financially struggling.
The marketing is first very deceptive because it's all this wonderful language of doing something noble, great, compassionate, generous, but it's heavily targeted to people who need money.
After the first surrogacy that we did, I honestly never thought I would do it again.
The girl embryo got kicked out and the boy embryo split into identical twins.
They paid extra to have a boy and girl embryo specifically put in.
I would never think somebody who's paid $150,000, $200,000 for a baby didn't want it.
The bills all went to collections. I didn't save $10,000 to pay these bills.
Once we had the kids, that was supposed to be the end of it, and it wasn't.
I've now had my eyes open to the fact that this is really about money, not about the children.
So Kelly Kelly contacted me, and when we opened the film actually with the actual email that she sent, which was basically, you know, I've looked for somebody to help me. Nobody can help me. This is my last plea. Can somebody please help me? She was a 3-time surrogate in the United States. Dr. B said I could go over. But I'm almost done, really. I have one more slide. It's my ending slide. So she was first a surrogate for a gay couple in Paris, where all surrogacy is illegal. She was lied to all along the way, and then found out at the very end that they couldn't get visas and passports to get the kids home. So she was told to go to the consulate in Chicago, the French consulate, and where they had cooked up a scheme that said she'd had an adulterous affair with one of the men, and that these were her children. She wasn't a surrogate, and that was the way that they got them out. She was terrified. Kelly didn't even finish 11th grade. I mean, she had no money. She was told, you'll have to pay all the money back if you don't, you know, comply. Her second surrogacy was for an American couple that soon after the woman gave birth, the couple divorced, and this woman that she was a surrogate for used her own eggs, was in the Mayo Clinic on a ventilator with such a severe ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome that Kelly said, I don't really think I should go through with the embryo transfer. The woman might die. And they're like, no, she'll be fine, go forward. And then her final surrogacy was for a heterosexual couple in Spain. Kelly almost died. These are high-risk pregnancies. It's all over the medical literature. A surrogate mother who's pregnant with foreign embryos is going to be in a much higher pregnancy category. She had severe preeclampsia, was borderline stroke. The doctor basically said, we need to deliver you now, or somebody's not going to make it. The Spanish couple came, took the babies back to Spain, and didn't pay all of her bills. So she reached out to me because she had collectors coming after her for $10,000 worth of medical bills that were not paid. And of course, she had no resources. She had no way to hire an attorney. So these are global issues, and that's why we told Kelly's story of big fertility, to sort of highlight the globalness, the fact that we need international laws to shut down this business. And that is my final slide. That's where you can find me. This is where all the places where we squat. Until social media, they shut us down now and again because we're haters. Mm-hmm. So anyway, thank you. That's all from me.
I'll be as short and sweet as I can, but I thought first, I'm not an expert in anything. I'm a philosopher. And the first thing you should know about a philosopher is that we think we know everything, but we can't finish a thought in 10 minutes. So, as my husband says, but I want to just, on this panel, I'm so honored because it's really humbling to be here with Jennifer, Dr. Gordon, Dr. Brachelski. But I want to give a little history to bring us to the questions like, how did we get here? You know, how do we conceive a culture that will exploit women in this way and children? And so I want to go back to the turkey baster, if you don't mind. And I'm going to say Pius XII and the turkey baster. Shortly after the Nuremberg trials, after the atrocities that we'd heard about in Nazi Germany, Pius XII gave a discourse to Catholic medics, like September of '49, and there were over 30 countries involved, and everyone was just really like, oh my gosh, we've got all this new technology, this new research at our disposal, and we want to do good with it, and all this motive, well-intentioned. And at the time, it was really the beginning of the understanding of third-party reproduction. Again, the turkey baster, and sperm donation, and manipulating, artificial reproduction. And so he gave what was very, very instructive, a very instructive understanding of human procreation. He said there are 4 objects. Human procreation procured outside of the marital conjugal act. And this is strong language. It's 49 is the Catholic Church. He says we must purely condemn this. And the motivation, which is the interesting part, he says we must condemn it to safeguard the dignity of the spouses, their personal good, and the education of children. So for the spouses, each of them, and for the children. And then he talked about heterologous reproductive technologies, which is which is really third party, so would be a sperm donor, someone outside of the marital union. Just absolutely condemn it without any form of appeal. And he said the motivation is that only the spouses have a right, a reciprocal right, through their body to generate a new life. And I'm going to go into that as quickly as I can later. And then he also addressed homologous, which is between the spouses. And he says, but we must absolutely exclude these artificial means. And motivation, he said, the active element is not ever able to be procured licitly, morally, within acts that go against human nature. So outside of the conjugal act, just like, and not just the natural law, but really human nature. Go into the reasons later. And then the fourth object he addressed is to artificial or assisted reproduction, which we came later to call the two differences. To reproduction to help the natural act. And he says this is licit, the moral guidance is licit, to assist the act to reach its appropriate end, procreation. And the motivation for his teaching there is, that, and I apologize, I'm translating this from my old Italian notes. The use of science, artificial means, to some degree science, but destined uniquely to help to reach the natural act, the normal natural act, reach its appropriate end, is, that's therapeutic. It complies with the therapeutic principle. Anything else on his little chart is like, well, nothing else is therapeutic because it's outside the box. It's like you're doing something else with medical science and technology. You're not addressing therapy for the couples and the child. And so I just thought, this was 1949, right? This was, and this still applies today, but because we're here at St. Tim's, I wanted to go just a little bit into Humanae Vitae, some of the church's teachings, because it's very philosophical. So this last half century, 60 years, has just witnessed great feats in the medical sciences for the alleviation of many forms of human suffering. I will tell you, infertility is a form of human suffering. It is just, and in the doctor-patient relationship, which Dr. Buchalski and here and Dr. Pilar-Calva can attest, patients come to you when they're suffering. They are vulnerable. And so the physician bears a greater responsibility to do the just and the right thing for them, not to just comply with some false form of autonomy to just give them what they want, but to really treat them therapeutically. And you always have, any patient. You have the patient. You also have the spouse, which is one thing I love about Tepeyac. My spouse always comes in, and it's in a way it's like the union. We're in this together. We're doing this together. This is our body. But so from whether the aim in medical technology has been to prevent life or to procure it, the new practices they found in Nazi Germany were, from contraception to, just progressed from the birth of Louise Brown, which Louise Brown in 78, I believe, in the UK, there were only over 200 embryos, 200 individual lives discarded in order to achieve Louise Brown, through in vitro fertilization. But now, from all that technology, we have surrogacy. We have such a commodity of the human person. We have therapeutic cloning, which there's no such thing as therapeutic cloning. Save your siblings, designer babies, the perfect child. The IQ that you've heard about, and all of this is evident in the suits that we have today for wrongful life, wrongful birth suits. These kids are coming forward saying, "Whoa, you treated me as a commodity. You did not. You killed my saving. I could have had a brother or sister. You killed them. There are lawsuits that no one talks about that are all over the place. And unfortunately, the IVF industry is highly unregulated. So it's here, there. It's all the contracts are different. It is a web of. So if you're a lawyer, you're going to make a ton of money, but you're going to do an immense amount of research in order to bring these cases to fruition. want to, the start of this really, and I want to get back, the start of this was really contraception. Please time me, because I was hoping I could zip through this fast, but all of this started, this vehicle to these new technologies. You know, you could say it was Nazi Germany. It wasn't. It wasn't in cloning, stem cells, or recent debates, but it was in contraception and the rejection of the nature and dignity of the marital union of the spouses. It found its denial in denial of chastity, which is also a denial of justice, and a denial of the justice to not just the couple, but the child, the fruit of their union. So 50 years ago, Paul VI and his encyclical Humanae Vitae, he enunciated this real anthropological understanding of the marital union, and on the generation, you know, this union of the spouses, which speaks us to today. But he said, Humanae Vitae offered contributions far beyond its time. This dualistic vision of the human person, which is to say, what we see in service, you know, that we're just, you know, our physical being, our material being is expendable or usable or something other than us. You know, that's the same thing as saying, I'm going to go out and have a one-night stand, and I'm going to say, I didn't do it, my body did. You know, I mean, you can't separate the two, right? You can't say that our personal identity, our physical, you know, nature, or even the marital union is something that is just merely biological or just, you know, again, expendable. So, but how did this get into our culture, this dualism? It started with contraception, because in essence, the contraception is what lent itself to these anti-life technologies, you know, population control agendas, eugenic regulation, and generation of human life. Practices so embedded now in our culture that we just believe them to be moral and even obliging. I mean, there's a philosopher at Oxford, Julian Savulescu, who thinks that because we have all this technology, and in order to alleviate human suffering, which is, you know, really the role of medicine, he says that we should only use these technologies, not natural fecundity, not natural conjugal unions, but in order to use CRISPR and all these other methods to make sure that we achieve the healthiest life, the smartest life, able to not just alleviate suffering, but the child able to flourish and have the most flourishing life, you know, happy, healthy, free of suffering, smart, all of these kind of things. And he says this, so this is like a moral imperative that we've gotten to. Well, that song's been sung before. You know, the frog was boiled in Germany slowly, sociologically. You know, to think that these lives weren't living, or that I mean, the whole push was to understand that we have to get rid of suffering. You know, and to get rid of suffering, as we know in eugenics today and even euthanasia, is to basically eliminate the one that suffers. Well, that's not a therapy, because the one who suffers is the patient. And I have half a minute, I'm guessing. But one thing that to understand, you know, from contraception all the way through this, is just to ruin the relationship between man and woman and to commodify the human person became possible when the man and the woman were able to say to each other, I don't take you the way you are. I take you on condition. I don't want your fertility. I don't want you, you know, I mean, it's the it's the same as saying, if we're going to get together, you need to change your hair color and you need braces, or, you know, clip your toenails a little shorter, or, you know, can you, you know, I mean, it is just the same. It's just the same. And in doing that, we have essentially set the platform for commodifying the human person at all stages, in all conditions. And that includes, you know, it's euthanasia. It's all across the board. And so with your children, you know, think about contracepting. I mean, it's a great way to say, be safe, go out, you know, da-da-da-da. No, teach them, respect each other. These women have become, you know, such vulnerable victims because all of the burden is on the woman today because of contraception, because of abortion, because of, you know, all the money and the this and that, because the man has no role and he has no responsibility. I mean, sure, you know, you can sue for, if you have the baby, you can go and sue for care, or, you know, support and whatnot. But the reality is is contraception said, it's all on you. I agreed, to get together with you on a condition that we deny your fertility. And so you failed in that condition, and here the responsibility is on you. I mean, everything puts it back on the woman, where the true unity of the spouses, as Pius XII says, through the one body. And, for the couple to respect that one body, it's not just in the conjugal act. It's in the rhythm of the woman's cycle. It's in NFP. It's in saying, this is us together. I'm part of the beauty of who you are, and I accept you unconditionally and in every way. Women don't have that today. And so women are, unfortunately, very, very, they don't get it. It's like, oh, well, why wouldn't it be great to do something good for someone else and give my eggs or da-da-da-da, Her eggs are much more than just her material biology. There's personal identity there. Anyways, it's too long, but thank you very much. I'm honored to be here.
Oh.
It's show and tell on Polish. It's very easy. I'm the intermission act here, the butter on the cheese and ham sandwich. I'm also the opening act to Dr. Gordon's initiative. It's really exciting to be here. I've also been on both sides of this issue. I'm John Berchowski. I'm almost 60 years of age, and I went to my residency program at the home of the first test tube baby in this country at the Jones Institute in Norfolk, Virginia. And listening to Jennifer's data, and once again, I've been friends with Jennifer and Jennifer for quite some time, and I've become a new friend of Dr. John Gordon. And I want you to know that it's a challenge for me to be up here, because I wanted to help women to the best of my ability, and I was a very tiny student part. I was a young resident that helped at the IVF Center in Norfolk, Virginia. And so I have 5 points that I want to talk about that are just pretty quick and kind of, they're stories, and they're help to tie all these wonderful, educated people together, because I'm just a clinician. Many of you are here. I help deliver babies and look at the genius of the feminine in her biology and her reproduction, and rather than suppress it or try to cooperate with it to figure out how to get at diseases that prevent full health and integration. Essentially, I'm 60. I was born in 1960 when the pill was born. We've learned over those years to devalue babies in Western culture, and now it dropped, and now they're coming back again, but now we have all these incredible technologies to help. And so today, on D-Day, for all the men out there who sacrificed their lives for Father's Day, as well as the D-Day folks on the beaches of Normandy, our prayers and our thoughts go out to you. But today, any means can be used to make a wished-for baby. Those are all good, as long as the pregnancy comes about at a convenient time. And if you can't conceive naturally, we should be able to purchase gametes like we talked about, eggs and sperm, and we would have easy access to we should have easy access to those technologies. It's a very personal matter, but individual desires obscure the profound social problems these have. Imagine someone wanting to build a home in the middle of Yosemite or on the beaches of Normandy. It affects all of us, and that's what we're talking about today. So my first story today is about being around the table at those early IVF days when we had 5 or 6 phenomenal geniuses, men and women who came from Johns Hopkins, and we were sitting around the table trying to noodle, how can we help women who suffer infertility with this new technology? These were good people. But this was the same place that not only had the first test tube baby, but it also had the first legal action. Mom and daddy divorced. Well, were these embryos your property or were they your children? We didn't want UCLA or the folks on the West Coast. I don't know if it was Ash at the time, but no, they don't do defreezing or they don't thaw embryos as well as we do, and they need to be in our. This was a real case in the late 1980s. with Dr. Howard Jones on one side and Dr. Jerome Lejeune on the other. I was a resident then. I was listening to those discussions, and it was an exciting time for us because we were not thinking of all these crazy things that were going to happen because the Joneses were a lovely older couple. They were grounded in the Anglican Church of Norfolk. We were only going to put back 4 embryos because we didn't want to have quintuplets and septuplets, because back then, Johnny, they were putting back 8, 9 embryos because we didn't have the technology and we wanted to increase our numbers. We were checking progesterone levels to see what the quality was. Dr. Georgiana would clap for good eggs and good embryos and sigh for bad embryos and bad quality eggs. It was a fascinating time to be around a table of men and women trying to do what they thought was right. And so that's the first story I want you to know, is that in those early days, I don't think they even conceptualized what we're dealing with today. That's the first thing. Let's see here. And so they struggled with ethics. But there was, God, no, the Catholic Church, no, they're not going to tell us what to do. But we have to come up with our own. We had to internally, and it was the beginning of the internal policing of what our clinics were doing across the country, because at that time, Dr. Jones both Joneses were considered leaders in this field. And so I want you to know that in the early days, they couldn't even conceptualize what was happening. And so they said, no, we don't want, you have to have good science here. And so therefore, they said only 4 embryos can be put back. And the most beautiful part about today with Dr. Gordon is that we talked about 1 embryo being put back because we want to decrease the risk as doctors today. 1 embryo, not 5, not 10, but the dynamic difficulties that we were facing at this time. But that's where it's come. We're trying to do what was best, but without a lot of guidance. So that's the first story. But what I saw there was a big difference about unconditional versus conditional appreciation or love. So story number 2, when women come into our practice today, before they may go on to reproductive endocrinologists, we just simply tell them and ask them, listen, when you and your husband go, you really need to kind of talk about, before you go, were the embryos they're making your children or are they your property? Do you love them or do you own them? Because for me and my change of heart that occurred at that place, it was at that moment that I stopped aborting. I stopped terminating sick children. I couldn't mess with embryos anymore. Despite the fact that I was attracted to their intellect, bringing minds and hearts together to solve a problem. It was an exciting time, folks. And now I see what has happened. And it kind of tears you up inside as a physician. Somebody who's trying to improve, somebody who is trying to live their faith, somebody who was trying to be the most excellent doctor they could be. So the second story that I'm telling you about is that thing. Do you love them or do you own them? It's the gametes, it's the embryos, it's the women. It's a commodification of us, of body parts. It's a big business, okay? My third story is, let's see here. My third story is about a patient of mine. So early on in my practice, I had a patient come into the office. She was 22 years of age, and she came in for an annual exam. She was just at Mason. She was in the biology department, and she simply said at the end of her visit, she says, is it perfectly okay to hate your mother or to think that your mother's going to kill you? And I said, what do you mean? No, that's not normal. She says, well, I'm a bio major over at the university, and I found out that I was conceived artificially in Norfolk at my program, probably during the time I was there. And she says, I learned in genetics that those embryos, they're genetically my siblings. and they didn't make it. And my mother said, I really loved you. We did the best we could. I don't believe her. And so she switched from biology to marketing, and she did this cartoon for me that hangs in my wall in my office. It's about McDonald's, about buying babies like ordering a hamburger. This is what she felt. This is her PTSD therapy. Well, about 2 years later when she left, I never really looked to see if that was one of the kids that I was there with. Probably not, because I really didn't spend a lot of time in that division. But this is what's going on. There are women out there now who, like we're talking about, they're the walking wounded. And this was a young patient. Story number 4. We now have excellent medicine to treat diseases that lead to infertility. Rather than make embryos, try to get at the infertility. How can we help men? How can we help women get around the diseases that are there, this cooperative? Some people call it naprotechnology. Some people just call it good gynecology. It's about basically listening with your one ear to the patient, and for us Christians, one ear to God, being the best doctor you can be, real good diagnoses. Be very critical, listen, engage, go after the endometriosis, go after the tubal damage, what you can do. And so we actually have that good piece, and that was for story number 4, and my last story before I let Dr. Gordon come up here, story number 5. This panel right here, what you're witnessing, this is like Philadelphia, 1775. This is NASA during the 60s with Wernher von Braun trying to figure out how to go back to the moon. The cat's out of the bag. As people hear about contraception, Pandora's box opened. We live in a real Wild West out here, folks. Everything's okay if if you don't hurt anybody, quote unquote, everything's okay. I just want you to know that for somebody like myself who's been doing this for a while, I've known Jen for a long time. It wasn't until her videos that got people excited or upset about this, because you have to shake people experientially. We have incredible teaching in our churches, especially in our Catholic Church. Incredible. But we need the experience of waking people up. That's what her videos did. First time, we're getting traction. We have incredible ethicists really thinking and working through. We now have doctors across the country who are really trying to give their lives over. How can we do this better? Like myself, in my little way, I help do some of this. How do I do it better? God's mercy, all that good stuff, yeah. Let's get on with it. He's given us a lot of talents. And then thirdly is Dr. Gordon. This idea of thinking outside the box with faith and science, because they're both together, to create a new initiative in a world that has gone crazy. And so I just want to say I'm grateful to be here tonight. There's always open to questions, but I'm going to let Dr. Gordon come on up here now.
Well, thank you for having me tonight, and it's always tough to go last, so I hope that you all are okay, and especially with the passionate John guy, a little bit energy back in the room right now, so that's good. We'll feed off that, and I really appreciate being able to join you all here tonight and talk a little about embryo adoption. Embryo adoption, embryo donation has grown out of some of the problems that we have created on our side in the fertility industry. And at this point in my life, I'm 55, and my thought is, for my next stage of my career, I want to try to help solve some of the problems that we have sort of inadvertently created in our best efforts to help people have families. and it's a very important issue to look at. So I want to talk to you tonight a little about embryo adoption. We can address some of the other third-party issues that have been brought up here. So as a disclaimer, I want to say that the opinions expressed in this presentation are mine alone, do not represent the opinions of my former employer, Dominion Fertility, nor any of its employees. I am not Catholic, I'm Presbyterian. I'm not a bioethicist or a philosopher, and actually I'm not even going to be a resident of DC for very much longer because we're moving to Knoxville, Tennessee this summer. So with that disclaimer, I just want to talk a little about some things about IVF. So first of all, in terms of the components of an IVF cycle, I just want to explain this little background and a little bit of science of what we're discussing tonight. So first of all, in a normal reproductive cycle, a woman produces a single egg, and the egg is contained in a fluid-filled sac called a follicle. And after about 14 days, that follicle releases the egg, the fallopian tube captures the egg. If you have intercourse, the egg and the sperm meet in the fallopian tube, the egg fertilizes, and then ends up in the uterus and implants around day 7 or 9 after ovulation. And then 2 weeks after ovulation, if a woman's pregnant, she doesn't get a period. If you're not pregnant, you get a period. So the normal reproduction cycle is 28 days. 14 days to grow the egg comes out, 14 days later you bleed. So in IVF, there are different approaches we can have. So in the original form of IVF, we use that single egg. So you can track that single egg, and you can go in there through transvaginal ultrasound and remove that single egg and fertilize that single egg and then put that single embryo back in the uterus. And that's natural cycle IVF, and that's actually how Louise Brown was conceived. At my former clinic, we actually did more natural cycle IVF than all the other clinics in the country combined. We would do about 800 cycles of natural cycle IVF. Very few clinics in the country offer natural cycle IVF. Most clinics rely on fertility medications, the one Jennifer was talking about, to induce these multiple follicles. So when you start your cycle and you have multiple follicles, although you normally would pick out one, the fertility drugs would keep the extra eggs growing for that cycle. And that's where you get these extra eggs. So the follicles would grow, and then we would undergo the egg collection, which we talked about, and these were usually done under IV sedation. If you have multiple eggs, then you're going to have a higher rate of potential complications, and those complications can be bleeding or infection, or ovarian torsion, or the hyperstimulation business, which was alluded to in her fine documentary, Exploitation. So once you have the egg or the eggs, then you fertilize them in the dish in the laboratory, which you mentioned about in vitro fertilization, either by putting 50,000 sperm with each egg or injecting a single sperm into each egg. That's called intracytoplasmic sperm injection, or ICSI. Then we let the embryos grow in the little dishes in the incubator, usually for somewhere between 2 and 5 days. And then at some point, the embryo is put back in the uterus, and this is similar to a pap smear. That's a very simple procedure to put the embryo back in. Now, again, if you put back more than one embryo, you could have more than one child. And that's what John was alluding to, saying in the early days, they put back 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 embryos. Well, we have pretty much gone to universal single embryo transfer in our clinic. And I tell a patient, if you get twins from this one, it's God's work, because I can't put in less than one. So I put in one, and it splits into 2. That is, there's nothing I can do to control that. But if you do put in the additional embryos, then you're going to run the risk. So when we had Nadia Suleiman in the West Coast, Octomom, I was called by CNN to say, would you like to speak about this? And I said, well, what is there to speak about? It is so outrageous. It is so beyond what is normal, appropriate care. And in fact, the medical authorities, he lost his license and he was kicked out of various societies, but it was so outside the realm of what we would do. And yet, going back 10 years, it wasn't so far outside the realm. And patients would get, as John was saying, multiple. So we have moved towards the single embryo transfer. But the thing is, if you start with these 15 eggs and you end up with 12 that fertilize, and you end up with 6 embryos, and your goal is to put back 1, what do you do with the extra 5? Okay, so that's where you end up with these frozen embryos. Okay, so that's where the extra embryos are coming from. If you put back 1 fresh, but you have 5 others, what do you do with them? We freeze them, and hopefully to come back later to use them. So when we look at the milestones in IVF, we have the birth of Louise Brown in '78, the birth of Zoe Leyland in Australia. That was the world's first successful frozen embryo transfer in '84. Hannah Strieg was the world's first, essentially, snowflake baby in terms of embryo adoption. So basically, a couple went to Ron Stoddard, who's an adoption attorney, and said, we have the situation where we'd like to adopt embryos that another couple wants to give to us. And would you handle that? Because you do traditional adoption. Ron was like, well, I guess I could arrange something. And so that's actually was the first one. And Hannah, I think she's just graduated from Biola University, and she actually, I think, is pre-med. So she was then a child who was an embryo that one couple had created, was willing to, in an open fashion, allow another couple to adopt carry that, and then raise her as their child. The Rand report in 2003 looked at the question of what happens with these extra embryos and how many are frozen, because there's no way to know. And their estimate was about 400,000 embryos frozen in the country with an 18% increase every year. That's a huge number. So you're probably estimating somewhere between 1.2 million or above frozen embryos in the country. When the whole issue on stem cells came up, the question of what do you do with these extra embryos? Could they be used for good in terms of destroying them to create embryonic stem cell lines? And the Bush administration wrestled with this, and that's sort of where we had children coming to the White House to promote the idea that these embryos are something unique. They are the only thing in the universe that turns into a human being. So if you're going to destroy them for stem cells, you have to realize that what you're doing is destroying what could be future children. Here are these children surrounding President Bush that were born from adopted embryos. And that was called snowflakes. So in 2018, there was a huge amount of focus in the media suddenly on this question of frozen embryos. Okay? We had the freezer failures at 2 IVF programs, one in Illinois and one at Pacific Fertility Center in San Francisco, where unfortunately freezers failed. The freezers I showed actually in my opening slides, a huge, basically container, it's a giant thermos essentially with liquid nitrogen in it. The embryos are stored in that. And unfortunately, the freezers lost their liquid nitrogen and the embryos defrosted. And so thousands of embryos were destroyed in the defrosting process, along with frozen eggs that women had frozen for future fertility. So there were 2 major problems at clinics around the country where we really hadn't had something on that scale happen. They happened within a month of each other. And then on the positive side, we had the birth of baby Emma Gibson, which Emma was an embryo that had been frozen for 24 years, okay? And actually the woman who adopted that embryo was 25 years old. So actually Emma was 24 years old, technically, mother's 25, and that was through the efforts of National Embryo Donation Center. Actually, it turns out that there is another embryo that Emma's parents are going to use soon, and that could be then the new record holder. We didn't know how long embryos could stay frozen, and it was assumed that there would be sort of a shelf life of embryos in the freezer. And in fact, in England, it was mandated that embryos would be destroyed after 5 years. And in 2003, in fact, they destroyed 5,000 embryos, saying the time has run out, and they just defrosted them, and that was it. And this generated actually the formation of the National Embryo Donation Center, which was created as a Christian nonprofit between the Christian Medical and Dental Association and Dr. Jeffrey Keenan in Knoxville, Tennessee. So this is my wife, Allison. We've been married for 32 years. My wife is a PhD. We met first week of graduate school at Duke. And she never failed to remind me that she has an earned degree, and I have a technical degree. Because what do you call the person who graduates last in his medical school class? Which wasn't me, by the way, but what do you call a person who graduates last? You call him doctor. And she pointed out that a PhD has to create unique research and go through a dissertation defense, and that is an earned degree. So our children, she's no dummy, my wife, so she got her PhD in instructional engineering at Duke. And then she went to Stanford on faculty and received tenure at age 34 at Stanford. Okay. She decided that she wanted to raise our children, so basically after our 3rd child was born, she came off of a family leave after being a visiting professor at Columbia and said, I'm done. I can't be a mom and do this now. I have to realize that there's a limit as to what I can do. So we have 4 children now, and our youngest is 16, but they've all gone into engineering. So they're smart, they all follow mom. So we had this wonderful trip planned to go to Italy last spring break in 2018, spring break, and unfortunately a couple weeks before the trip she slipped going down the stairs in down our basement and actually broke her ankle. Not very badly, but the trip was canceled, and she spent a lot of time actually just sort of delving deep into Bible study and to Scripture. And I came home one day, I guess it was last April, so it was April 2018, and I walked in the house and she said, I'm going to tell you something you don't want to hear. I'm like, okay, like the dog did something, I mean, your kids are, what? She said, everything that you've done in your career is blood money, and everything that we have is from blood money, and I think it's all wrong. And I was like, oh, okay, how was your day, honey? You know, I was like 32 years of marriage, and I was like, okay, well, I said, all right, once my blood pressure came down, and once my pulse came down, I said, well, okay, what exactly are you talking about? She said, well, you see about these embryos that defrosted in, in the freezers, and this embryo that was frozen. Do you have embryos like that at your clinic? I go, yeah, we have like 4,000 frozen embryos. And she's like, well, what the hell are you doing with them? I go, well, I don't know, they just kind of sit there. She's like, and you're not doing anything about that? You don't think that's like a terrible thing? And I was like, well, I mean, now you kind of say it that way. I mean, it does seem not so good. And she said, not so good. She said, you're a Princeton-educated, Duke-educated physician, and you're doing nothing about this problem? You better do something about this problem. And I said, okay, I guess I'm going to do something about this problem. So in this journey that John was alluding to, so I sort of reached out to those in the field in terms of embryo adoption, saying, well, at least we have these embryos frozen. We need to think about what could we do? And there are two major players in the embryo adoption field, and that's Snowflake, which Ron Stoddard, who I alluded to, actually is his organization. It's a Christian nonprofit out of California as part of Nightlight Christian Adoptions, and then the National Embryo Donation Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. And so this is really sort of a Saul on the road to Damascus moment for me. I mean, to really say, you know, what are we doing here? What responsibility do I have as a physician? And clearly, we have a responsibility. And I said, listen, I have the responsibility to our patients who have cryopreserved embryos and are conflicted about what these embryos represent. Because when the patients freeze the embryos, they're like, well, if I don't use them, it's fine. And they don't feel that way once they have children, okay? Because all of a sudden, that embryo in the freezer is not just a clump of cells. That embryo is a future child, okay? And they cannot understand now what to do about that problem. These aren't necessarily people of faith either. These are people, just normal people who said, I can't. That's why these embryos are still stored. If they viewed them as nothing, they wouldn't pay $500 a year to keep them frozen. So they don't view them as nothing. They just don't know what to do about it. We clearly have a responsibility for the embryos that are stuck in limbo. What are our responsibility for these embryos? And then what about the children who are born following ART and are searching for insight into their old origins? What happened to my siblings? You know, where are they? And how could you have done this? So when we look at the patients that have the frozen embryos, they are faced with these disposition decisions. There's really, you know, the question, are there good options or not? Well, they could be used for further attempts to conceive. That's obviously a good option, right? You come back, you use your embryos, whatever embryos you make, you're going to use. You're going to come back and use. You could donate to another couple to have a baby. That would be a good use of it. You could use medical research, but that's a destructive option. You could abandon them, and unfortunately, many patients choose to abandon. We have thousands of embryos in the country literally abandoned. Patients have moved. They won't answer responses to say you need to do something. They just literally abandon them. And no clinic is really brave enough to just destroy them because nobody wants to be on the front page of Washington Post saying, I came back from East Timor and only found out after being in the Peace Corps for 10 years that you destroyed my embryos. Like, there's no FedEx in East Timor, so whatever. You could destroy them with or without a discard ceremony. There's a company in Australia, I think, that is like vaporizing supposedly these embryos and turning them into jewelry, which is like some hideous response. I mean, it's like, I can't even get my head around that one. You could do what's called compassionate transfer, where the embryo is placed back into the woman's body at a time where it would not allow implantation, or you could just keep them stored indefinitely. And that's what people do. And that's why we're in the situation we're in, because they can't decide. They can't decide. So let's talk, what is an embryo? So here, this is a day 5 blastocyst. So in an embryo, this is the part that makes the baby. This is called the inner cell mass. These cells on the outside, that's what turns into the placenta. Okay, so this is a day 5 human embryo. And if this embryo splits right down the middle, that's where you get identical twins. Okay. So what is it, though? Is it property? Is it nascent human life? Is it a person? Is it something else? And clearly, there's a debate as to, you know, depending on your background, what this is. So let's look at the 3 paradigms as to what an embryo is. So we have the ASRM paradigm, which has been unchanged since '86. We have Robbie George and Chris Tolston, who's a nice guy here, but he's a South Carolina fan. We're a Clemson family, but what can I say? And then we've got from the Catholic Church, the excellent document, Dignitas Personae, from 2009. I think I got the date wrong. So what has ASRM said? Well, the Ethics Committee has held to this since 1986. The pre-embryo is due greater respect than other human tissue because of its potential to become a person because of its symbolic meaning for many people. It should not be treated as a person because it has not yet established the features of personhood. It is not yet established as developmentally individual, and it may never realize its biological potential. So that's the ASRM view. Robbie George's view is different. Human embryos are, from the very beginning, human beings, sharing an identity with, though younger than the older human beings that they will grow up to become. Human embryos are not, that is to say, some other type of animal organism like a dog or a cat. Neither are they a part of an organism like a heart or a kidney or a skin cell, nor again are they a disorganized aggregate, a mere clump of cells awaiting some magical transformation. A human embryo is a whole living member of the species Homo sapiens in the earliest stage of its natural development. The embryonic, fetal, child, and adolescent stages are phases in the development of a determinate and enduring entity, a human being, who comes into existence as a single-celled organism or zygote and develops, if all goes well, into adulthood many years later. The church has offered this, and I thought Dignitas Personae is an excellent document. I've asked physicians when I've given this talk, have you, any of you at the Catholic Institute read this? And almost nobody has. But it is actually spot on, and I was very impressed by the science presented in the document. So for Dignitas Personae, it says it is appropriate to recall the fundamental ethical criterion expressed in the instruction Donum Vitae in order to evaluate all moral questions which relate to procedures involving the human embryo. Thus, the fruit of human generation from the first moment of its existence, that is to say, from the moment the zygote is formed, demands the unconditional respect that is morally due to the human being in his bodily and spiritual totality. The human being is to be respected and treated as a person from the moment of conception, and therefore from that same moment has rights as a person that must be recognized, among which, in the first place, is the inviolable right of every innocent human being to life. So when we think about then these embryos are frozen and we try to wrestle with this disposition decision, when we look at embryo adoption or embryo donation, there's even a big discussion about the semantics because truly adoption is postnatal. So ASRM, American Society of Reproductive, has offered this, equating an embryo with an existing child and applying the procedure requirements of adoption designed to protect existing children to embryos is not ethically justifiable and has the potential for harm. First, the ethical directive to protect an existing child is not applicable to human embryos, which are not persons. Second, the procedures which place unwarranted burdens on the recipient patient, home visits, legal fees, and judicial review are all standard elements of adoption, but are appropriately absent in the context of assisted conception through medical means. Individuals or couples who seek assistance in forming or procuring embryos for their own reproductive use are entitled to the same procreative privacy that accompanies natural conception. There is no justification for applying the language and components of adoption to patients who already face burdensome medical procedures in the pursuit of their family formation goals. In fact, Jeffrey Keenan in his office has a letter hanging from ASRM that says, by even using the word adoption in terms of embryo adoption, you are doing incalculable harm to the field of reproductive medicine. That's pretty good for a guy in Knoxville, Tennessee. Incalculable harm. That's amazing. I want to point out this. This is my dog, Lucky. Okay? Lucky came from a kill shelter in South Carolina. Lucky was heartworm positive. He was abandoned by his owner. He had to have heartworm treatment. In order for me in suburban Washington, D.C. to adopt this heartworm positive shelter dog from a kill shelter in South Carolina, I had to apply. I had to write an essay about what it meant to be Lucky's dad. I had to undergo a criminal background check and fingerprinting. I had to undergo a 4-hour home visit where somebody inspected our home to make sure Lucky would be happy in our home. And I had to sign a contract that said, if I decide Lucky does not fit in my family, I must return Lucky back to this agency so he may be placed with another family. So to say that what I had to go through to adopt a heartworm positive shelter dog from South Carolina kill shelter is outrageous compared to what you would do to adopt a human embryo, I don't buy it. I'm sorry. I just don't think that's an appropriate comparison. So let me end with an allegory that I was told. I really interacted with amazing people in this journey I've been on, and that includes Robbie George and Gil Mylander, and also Father Peter Ryan and Ted Furton, National Catholic Biology Quarterly. And I called up, when I talked to Father Peter Ryan, he's a Jesuit, and I gave this talk, and everyone's like, oh, he's a Jesuit. I'm like, okay, what does that mean? Well, he's a Jesuit. I said, no, I'm Presbyterian. I don't know what that means. He said, well, he's a Jesuit. I said, like the Jesuits. I go, anyway, so we moved on. So I said, listen. He said, John, here's your problem, okay? You're sitting at the banks of this beautiful river, and it's a wonderful day. And you look up, and you see this basket floating down the river. And you wade out in the river, because, it's a nice day, and you wonder what's in the basket. And you look in the basket, it's a baby. Sort of a very Moses-type Old Testament story. So you take the basket back to the shore, and you turn around, and you look, and there's 2 more baskets right there floating down the river. So you wade back out, and you take those baskets in. And then you look, and there are 4 more baskets coming down the river. And you're like, what? And you wade out in the river, and then you finally look upstream. And upstream, you see wall to wall, riverbank to riverbank, babies in baskets as far as the eye can see. And that is what you have created in this field. That is the problem that you are responsible for. And that's what you need to fix, and that's what you need to think about. And when we look at the ART report, we have 263,000 cycles of IVF in this country, including fresh IVF, frozen transfer joint. We have only 1,800 embryo adoption cycles, of which 10% are being performed in Knoxville. Okay, that's what we've got. That's the problem. We're never going to catch up. Okay, we're never going to pull all the babies out of the river. Okay, that's the problem. So Ted Furton, I'll leave you with this, the final word. The defenders of embryo adoption believe the good of human life must be the first principle in any consideration of what is at stake in this debate. These innocent human lives brought into being and abandoned deserve our utmost effort to give them a chance at normal existence. It is sometimes distressing to see the endlessly convoluted and technical discussions about the morality of embryo adoption when we are faced with such an immediate and pressing human need. Innocent human lives are in danger, and they deserve our assistance. Thank you.
Doctor, and Dr. John, Jennifer, and Jennifer, that's absolutely amazing. I want to do a couple of things here. I've got a couple of questions here that we'd like to ask, and then we'll open up the questions to the crowd. It is truly amazing to see all of you and the different realms and your different expertise on this topic. Really a beautiful thing. We have two questions to the panel, and you can each kind of grab these and try to spend 2 or 3 minutes on answering them if you don't mind. How can ethics keep up with the rapidity and the challenge and the changing pace of technology? How should we walk and talk with other pro-life friends who are uninformed and have these issues, given the fact that many defend third-party reproduction because they are deeply saddened by their own infertility or a family member's infertility and would like to see more babies born? Anyone want to? Sure. Well, yeah. There's two questions within there, I guess, really. How does the ethics keep up with the rapidity of the changing and the pace of the technology is really the first one.
I'm happy to answer that question. We had an entire symposium on this recently done in Florida and brought some, I had one, and brought some individuals in on it. And, you know, we have transhumanism and, you know, efforts to, you know, increase your genius and you know, you know, we have every form of manipulation upon the human person that, you know, we have head transplants, and, you know, it doesn't mean, you know, CRISPR, gene editing, it doesn't mean the human person is something other than what the human person has always been. In our little debate with the philosophers on, you know, do the old ethics still apply? We know the answer is yes, of course they do, because you still have the same old principles, timeless principles, pre-Christianity. They will be, you know, maybe today they're post-Christianity. The human person is still the human person. I mean, you can alter a gene, you can do this or that to them, but in the end, you have a human individual who is either suffering some natural form of malady or some imposed form of malady or assistance or you know, external perfection, you know, human bionic. It doesn't really matter. I mean, once you have a human presence, an individual substance of a rational nature, same as Boethius, that personal presence, I mean, we have a principle in ethics called the principle of non-contradiction. It can either be or it can't be. You know, you either are or you're not. And so from the moment of conception, whether that conception is manipulated, is altered, if you have genetically a human individual, an organism that can only that is self-directing, that can only become anything, only what it is, then the old ethics still apply. The old ethics still apply. I mean, you have to respect what is. I mean, even pre-Christian, even Aristotle, really taught in the essence of his teaching that the presence of a human individual in relation to society, that society can only flourish when the human individual is respected. Not as in a human individual as far as like the humanity is respected, but the individual. Because the minute a government or a society or a culture doesn't respect the individual, it collapses, because that's the nucleus. We are always taught in our faith that the nucleus of a good society is the family, and that's true. Because but the respect for, politically speaking, the respect for the human individual is the nucleus of any form of flourishing, of medicine, of science. So the ethics do apply. The real question I think we have today is a debate between human nature and the human condition. And the question is, the human condition seemingly changes when you make man half bionic, or if you have human-animal hybrids and so forth. So the question is, what is the thing itself? Well, we can still science is also so advanced that we can actually still answer that question. I mean, it's not that we don't know what it is. We do know. I mean, you ask geneticists, Pilar, they have principles. You know that the entity that is before you is either human or not human. There is really no question about that. It might have external parts. It might have certain enhancements, but the ethics still do apply.
Anyone else?
Very long.
I guess I could say something, and maybe the good doctors too, on the people who can't have children and how do we speak to them. We're not recording right now, right?
We are still.
We are. I thought you said the Q&A wasn't going to be.
Fine, Q&A won't be.
Got it. So I can speak freely.
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Oh, I thought this was the Q&A part.
No, this is Will's question.
Got it. Well, I think good clinicians. Dr. John's talked about listening. I mean, you can't treat everybody with talking points and one message, one size doesn't fit all. I try to always be very sympathetic to the fact that people who can't have children want children, and that's a loss. It's a sadness, that's grief. But how do we remind people we don't have a right to a child? We live in an era, a time of rights, and because we have technology, we should have access to that technology, whether we be gay, straight, infertile, or whatever. That sometimes God has something else for people. If not for children, there might be something else that is awaiting. It's not a death sentence. I remind people in the garden, Adam was lonely, he got a wife, there were no children, and it was very good. It wasn't very good because there were children in the garden. So you can live full, complete lives as husbands and wives without having children. And then there is good, proper medicine. What can we do to alleviate, to treat? To me, the bright line is just, we should never have taken egg and sperm out of the body. And that sort of opened up all these problems that we have. So what can we do still within the body, within the spirit of good diagnosis, good proper medicine to try to help? And with the reality that there will still be, since the beginning of time, the barren womb. And that's part of the human condition and the fallenness of our state as humans.
Just my small experience is that for us in the industry, it's always easier to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. And so what I mean by that is that we would do experiments with minimal oversight. And then we would say, we can do this. Do you think we should? And the world has a very hard time telling you, listen, we can help people right now, doing this right now. And what do you do then? Because we're only presenting a lot of these issues post facto, after we already have the technique available. And so that's a real challenging, because the ethical part is always changing. The second piece of this ethical issue is that I think words have lost their meaning. Yeah. Václav Havel, who was this great poet, president of Czechoslovakia during the time of Lech Walesa in Poland, he wrote this thing. He says, the tragedy of modern medicine, modern man, is not that he knows less and less about the meaning of life. I would argue that we know more and more about the meaning of life, but that it bothers him less and less. Meaning, we don't give a damn. It's above my pay grade. I'm not going to deal with it because I'm suffering right now, and I have to tell you that suffering of infertility is deep. So for myself and my small little workings, it's about experience. When Dr. John listened that morning to his wife, excuse me, but I have something to tell you. Is it the dog? Is it your nothing? That was experiential. That went, because of husband and wife, 30-some years, into his heart, like me. That day that I walked out of my own moment and said, oh my God, what have I been doing? That baby actually fought me when I aborted it. What in God's name? What do I, And all of a sudden, that experience then triggers us to go read. Do you understand that Dr. John was talking about, he had my profession, he had his profession there, he had Robbie George, who's a really brilliant guy, and then he had the Catholic position. You begin to look and read and talk and share and communicate heart to heart from one Christian to another oftentimes, from different backgrounds. And you know what? That's what gets us, because the truth is the truth, like you said. But I know myself, I literally had to wake up because I was had my head down. I was just wanting to do this over and over again. I had to get shaken. And that's why it's hard on the ethical end, because we're always, at least from my perspective, we're always playing catch up. Because it can be done, now what do we do with it? Rather than, let's think about this, because as human beings, we don't kind of do it that way. At least that's my consensus.
Yeah, historically, we haven't done it that way, right? We Jerome Lejeune, once we knew how to, he discovered how do we discover the trisomy 21, and then what were the ramifications for that?
Well, now we're gonna abort them.
Exactly.
Wait a second.
Right.
No, they're part of our family.
Right. Right.
Whenever we say the Our Father every day, like you started, I believe you started the symposium on it. We're part of the family, not just through baptism and through the Christian. We are family genetically, and that's why when I think we're pulling apart, when we see that we're abusing. I was up in the Catskills, and those baskets do come down the Willowwemoc and the Beaverkill River. They're there for any one of us who's been in. For me, that's beautiful. It really, that provokes me to do more. Or not to do more, but to say, Lord, Daddy, show me what else I need to do here, or to take these leaps of faith that we all have, whether it's ethically or whether it's, with video, with movies, or with adoption, or with medicine. I agree.
Dr. Gordon?
Well, all good points. I think that Jennifer's point in terms of, in terms of the infertile couple, and my friend Matthew Lee Anderson wrote in Christianity Today about why the church needs the infertile couple, and that there is life that is not necessarily as a parent, and life is not just empty if you don't have children, and we have not been good at that, nor is life empty if you're not married. I mean, there is life in singleness too, and he said the church has not been good at expressing that. And then he called me and said, John, I'm writing this article with the Gospel Coalition, and you're not going to like it. But I said, all right, well, it's fine. Send it to me, and I'll read it. And so he sent me the proof, and I read it over. I said, well, you get some terms here a little off, and it's a very Catholic position for evangelical. He said, I know, and they almost weren't going to publish it. And so they published it, and there was a rebuttal. And it came to the ethics, to your point, is saying, well, if you're in a Wild West situation, the patients will have no limits, okay? They won't. I mean, I try to get patients to have limits, it won't work. So as I look at my next stage in my career, I just need to put the limits because they won't. I'll say, this is the way my clinic functions, okay? And if you don't want to abide by that, that's fine. I would understand, you can go to a different clinic. But this is the way I'm going to practice. And I'm not going to use donor gametes. And I'm not going to have gestational carriers. We're going to limit how many embryos are fertilized and how many eggs are fertilized. And we're not throwing out any embryos. And in Louisiana and New Mexico, you actually cannot throw out embryos. So I'm just saying, that's the clinic that I will have, and that's the clinic that I'm going to, because that's the way that Jeff practices in Knoxville. And that's why I'm going to Knoxville to take over his clinic so he can slowly kind of retire. and then to do the embryo adoption. So that's, to me, that's what you have to do, because it has to come from the ground up, because the patients won't put the limits on it. And I think that people, I guess, can choose to do that. It's a free country. In terms of even gestational care, I mean, Christianity Today had an interesting article, a big article about cover story on gestational carriers. So I guess that's my view of it. I mean, the Catholic Church was very clear. If you do IVF, you're going to regret it. Okay? If you open that Pandora's box, you're going to have problems that you can't even dream of down the road. You know what? We have problems we've never dreamed of. In Christianity Today, it talked about CRISPR technology. It said that it all depends how you ask the question. Do you think that creating technology that allow you to eliminate diseases in embryos before they're born would be a good thing? Patient says, well, yeah, sounds like a good thing, right? Okay. And they say, in order to do that, you would have to destroy thousands and thousands of human embryos to validate, to see if it even works. And that was a story that said that maybe those people, like in that experiment about the HIV resistance, that those people may have shortened lifespans. So we don't know what we're doing. I mean, if you start mucking around with the human genome, you don't know what effects are going to show up. Now, look what did we learn nothing with the DES debacle? Right. We gave DES to pregnant women to prevent miscarriage. We had no idea why to give it. We said, oh, let's give DES because it's synthetic estrogen. We didn't even know it created a problem until another generation, because the women, the girls who were in utero when their mothers took DES, showed no signs until they were in adolescence and beyond. And we had an entire generation of women whose reproduction was altered in a negative way. So I feel like tinkering with genetics is very, very problematic. I mean, if you watch any science fiction movies, and I like going to the Charlotte Loser List site because they have all the reviews. I mean, have you learned nothing from watching science fiction movies about tinkering with genetics? I mean, so I'm just saying, I think that's the ethical limitations, and yet it's how you phrase the question. It's a good. Having children is a good. How could having children? But if you approach Robbie George said, if you approach complete utilitarianism, that the ends are totally justified by the means, then where are we? Is that what we want to do? I think we don't.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that and that response and from all of you. We all want to open the questions to the crowd. If anyone has questions, I'm going to bring the microphone to you. Anyone?